What if I told you that Battlefield 6 just brought back a system most players assume was gone forever? And they did it without making any real noise about it. Something the studio quietly revived behind the scenes. Almost like they didn't want the community to notice too quickly. Because depending on who you ask, this single move might be the biggest sign yet that Battlefield is preparing for something much larger than the December update. And the wild part? Most players still have no idea what's actually going on. For months, Battlefield Labs has been nothing more than a memory from the early days of Battlefield 6. It disappeared without a clear explanation, and most players just moved on. The studio never hinted that it was coming back, never teased its return, and definitely never suggested it would play a major role again. That's why this sudden revival shocked so many people. Not because Labs existed, but because they brought it back exactly when the game's foundation is being questioned the most. Today, we're diving into what this comeback really means, why developers suddenly reopened a program they shelved after launch, and how the tests happening inside it might completely reshape the game. So, let's start with the one thing nobody expected to see return this year. And here's the interesting part. This wasn't a big marketing moment. There was no trailer, no flashy announcement, no grand Labs is back reveal. Instead, it reappeared quietly, tucked into patch notes and developer posts like it was something casual. But it's not casual, not even close, because anytime a studio suddenly reopens an invite-only testing system after shutting it down, something serious is going on behind the scenes. Labs isn't just a place for players to peek behind the curtain. It's the environment developers use when they're experimenting with features that could completely change how the game plays. It's where risky ideas go to get stress tested before the public ever finds out they exist. And that alone should have players raising an eyebrow. But the surprising part isn't even that Labs returned, it's why it returned. Battlefield's lab system isn't some small feedback box where they ask players if a weapon feels good or bad. It's the environment for testing features that are too unstable to drop straight into the live game. Whenever the devs think a system might break something cause backlash, or just completely flop, this is where they take it first. And the fact that they're using it again means the updates being prepared aren't simple bug fixes. They're foundational changes. There's a reason the early launch of Battlefield 6 felt so smooth compared to previous entries. Labs let the dev team gather real, hands-on reactions from players before the game even dropped. That direct communication helped them avoid major disasters with balancing system tuning and map pacing. So if they're reopening that door now, after months of silence, it means they're not just tweaking things, they're preparing to reshape deeper parts of the experience. Imagine trying to redesign map flow, rewrite audio systems, or overhaul hitreg without player testing. One wrong move and the entire community melts down. That's why Labs matters so much. It removes the guesswork. Instead of hoping players like the changes, the devs can see it in real time and adjust instantly. But this time, something's different. The structure of the new lab sessions reveals exactly how serious the studio is getting and how quickly they need feedback. And that's where things start getting interesting. When the developers announced Labs was coming back, they didn't just say, testing is open again. They broke it down into 2 session types, and the difference between them tells a much deeper story. The first type is the planned play session. These are long-term tests for features that are still in development, but far enough along that the studio wants players to shape them. Think of this as the future preview category. When the devs are confident about a feature, but want community guidance on polishing it, this is where it goes. But the second type, that's the one that really raises questions. They're called quick short notice sessions, and they're not used unless something suddenly needs urgent feedback. These pop-up sessions allow the devs to rapidly gather insight when a system is unstable, unpredictable, or causing issues they need eyes on immediately. In other words, when something might be bigger or more complicated than they expected. If the studio is planning more of these fast-track sessions, it suggests they're testing mechanics that could ripple across the entire game. Systems that can't wait weeks for feedback. Systems that require reactions from hundreds or thousands of players, not just a small test group. And that's not the only clue. Developers also said they're exploring ways to bring more players into labs than ever before. That doesn't happen unless they're preparing for updates that could dramatically shift gameplay. They need a wider range of devices, skill levels, and playstyles to make sure the changes don't break the game for certain groups. But the clearest hint of all comes from what they chose to test first. Because the early labs topics aren't small, safe adjustments. They're targeting some of the most controversial systems in the entire game. And the first item on that list might be the one players have been begging for all year. Let's talk about the one update that could instantly change the feel of every single match. The audio overhaul. Footsteps, distance perception, surface clarity, enemy positioning, the entire sound pipeline is on the table. And the moment players saw this listed as a labs test item, the reaction was immediate. Footsteps in Battlefield 6 have been one of the biggest complaints since launch. Not because the audio is bad, but because it's inconsistent. In tight buildings, everything blends together. Sometimes enemy players feel like they're above you when they're actually below. Friendly footsteps drown out enemy ones, and certain surfaces make every footstep sound identical, which turns close quarters fights into guesswork. This is exactly the kind of update you cannot push straight to the live game without testing it first. If the devs mess up audio balancing, the game instantly goes from tactical to chaotic. And the fact that they're testing this in labs shows one thing clearly. The changes they're making are far bigger than simple volume tweaks. They're reworking distance perception so you can finally tell whether someone is a room away or 3 rooms down. They're dialing in surface definition, so concrete, metal, carpet, and snow don't all sound the same. But the most important part, and the part players are buzzing about, is enemy audibility. Right now, enemy footsteps blend too easily with friendlies. It's been a recurring issue across multiple Battlefield titles, and fixing it requires deep changes to the audio engine. That's why this is being tested in labs. Because if they push this live and something goes wrong, the entire community would explode overnight. But audio isn't even the most controversial system being tested, because next up is the one problem players have been complaining about for years, and this time, the devs might actually be changing how the entire hit reg system works. If there's one topic that sends Battlefield players into instant debate mode, it's hit registration. For years, it's been the one system every player agrees needs work, yet fixing it has always been one of the hardest tasks. That's because hit reg doesn't exist in a vacuum. It sits on top of the game's networking stack, the part of the game that decides whether a shot counts, when it counts, and how quickly your client and the server agree on what happened. And if you've ever felt like you were absolutely certain you landed your shots, but the kill feed said otherwise, you already know how frustrating it can be. Long-range fights, usually fine. Mid-range duels, mostly consistent. But close quarters combat, especially inside buildings, is where everything breaks down. You pop a corner, your crosshair is already lined up, you fire the first shot, and then suddenly you're dead, even though on your screen you turned the corner first. This is the classic "I died before the enemy even appeared on my screen" problem that players have clipped thousands of times. The December Labs session is finally targeting this exact issue. The developers are rebuilding parts of the networking system to tighten responsiveness, reduce client/server desync, and improve how the game handles very fast, very close exchanges. This isn't just a tiny netcode patch, it's a structural refinement. They're focusing on the moments where everything needs to be absolutely accurate. Sliding past an enemy shoulder, peeking around cover, rapid strafing in hallways point blank, shotgun encounters, sprint to fire transitions, high-speed corner fights, last-second trades on objectives. These moments have always felt the most unpredictable. Sometimes the game feels buttery smooth. Other times you could swear the server is half a second behind your input. That inconsistency is exactly what the devs want to eliminate. Here's the secret players don't usually hear. Fixing networking systems is terrifying for developers. Touch one line of code, and suddenly bullets might pass through enemies, players might teleport, or hit markers might become unreliable. That's why this update is going into labs first. If they pushed this straight to the live game and it caused widespread problems, it would instantly become the biggest controversy of the year. But testing it in labs means the devs can track how people play, measure actual hit confirmation times, analyze ping distribution, and see how different hardware reacts to the changes. And here's the interesting part. They're doing this before the December update, which means they likely want the revised hit reg system ready much sooner than players think. But what they're hiding behind vague wording hints at something even bigger. One line in the lab's announcement caught everyone off guard. It said they were testing broader adjustments across key combat systems. And the moment players saw that phrase, the theories started flying. Because when a studio uses vague language like this, it's rarely about something minor. Developers only hide specifics when the systems they're experimenting with are sensitive or incomplete. So, the community began breaking it down. What key combat systems could they be talking about? It could be the movement system. It could be recoil patterns. It could be damage curves. It could be map pacing. It could be spawn logic. It could be vehicle mobility. It could be tactical sprint values. It could even be the TTK. When a phrase like key combat systems appears, it means the changes touch multiple areas at once. These aren't tweaks. They're adjustments that ripple across the entire experience. Imagine if they are adjusting. How fast players rotate around the map, how quickly gunfights resolve, how predictable weapon duels feel, how the game handles 1v2 or 1v3 scenarios, how vehicles interact with infantry choke points, how reward pacing flows during aggressive pushes. Those types of changes can transform the meta instantly. But here's the real theory floating around. The devs might be preparing for a major pacing overhaul. Players have been complaining about certain maps feeling too cramped or too stretched. Others feel like infantry and vehicles collide too violently in certain lanes. Some areas feel unfinished. Some layouts don't support large-scale gunfights particularly well. A broader adjustment could mean repositioned cover-changed objective layouts, redesigned choke points, new spawn logic, improved flow for infantry lanes, different rotations for vehicle entry points. But here's where things get interesting. They're not testing these changes on every map. They chose two very specific ones. The devs could have chosen any maps for labs testing, but instead, they specifically selected Eastwood and Operation Firestorm, two of the most intense, high-stress maps in the entire game. And that selection wasn't random. Eastwood is notorious for its chaotic verticality. You have tight interior spaces stacked on top of wide exterior areas. You have rooftops, stairwells, hallways, and large open kill zones, all shifting between close-range chaos and long-range suppression. If you want to test audio systems, this is the perfect environment. Operation Firestorm, on the other hand, is a map where infantry and vehicles constantly collide. Tanks push too aggressively. Choppers dominate open airspace. Infantry squads constantly try to cut through open fields, only to get blown apart by a vehicle they couldn't hear approaching. If you want to test hit reg, pacing, or movement flow, this is the ideal choice. Choosing these maps wasn't about convenience. It was about stress testing the systems that break the most easily. Audio clarity, vertical movement awareness, hit reg in tight environments, infantry survival rates, vehicle pressure, pacing map, rotation, balance, choke point, predictability. You don't choose maps like these unless you're preparing for something bigger, something that affects the whole game, not just one corner of it. And once you connect these dots, labs returning, deeper internal testing, hit reg overhaul, audio rebuild, map pacing analysis, you start to see the bigger picture forming. Because this isn't about one patch, this is about what Battlefield is preparing to become in the next season, and possibly even the next year. When you zoom out and look at everything the devs are doing, one thing becomes obvious. Battlefield is being prepared for a major evolution, a shift in direction, a pivot towards something more ambitious than just routine updates. You don't overhaul audio unless you're planning to push higher intensity gameplay. You don't rework hit reg unless you're preparing for faster pacing. You don't adjust map layouts unless new mechanics are coming. You don't bring back labs unless something big is in development. And recently, the devs openly mentioned that future lab sessions will test things like prototype mechanics, experimental rule sets, new mode structures, environmental changes, early season features before they're finalized, new map concepts, alternative team compositions, smaller player counts, vehicle-heavy rule sets. That last part, alternative team compositions, is especially interesting because it suggests they might be exploring different Battlefield identities. Faster modes, more tactical modes, more vehicle-centric experiences, or even large-scale experiments that change how teams coordinate. This kind of expansion doesn't happen unless the devs have a long-term plan. And everything they're doing now points to a future where Battlefield becomes much more adaptable, almost like they're preparing the game to support more experimental content drops, more seasonal shifts, and more frequent meta evolutions. The December update might just be the first step toward that transformation. But that's not all. Because DICE also mentioned testing, prototype mechanics, early concepts, experimental rule sets, environmental changes, new modes, and map experiences. Basically, Labs is about to become the place where Battlefield's wildest ideas come to life long before they reach the public. And that means the future of Battlefield is much more flexible, experimental, and community-driven than it has ever been before. But before any of this can happen, one long-standing issue had to be addressed, and the developers finally broke their silence. If you fly in Battlefield, you already know the pain. The air radar has been broken for what feels like forever. It barely shows threats, updates inconsistently, and fails to give pilots the information they need to survive. For months, players have been begging for clarity, and many assumed DICE was simply ignoring it. But then something unexpected happened. The lead vehicle developer at EA DICE, the one responsible for aircraft systems, finally spoke up. He confirmed the problem, he acknowledged the frustration, and he stated clearly that a fix is already on the way. He did explain it's taking longer because the minimap and radar system work differently on this engine. But he didn't downplay the severity. He didn't deflect. He didn't sugarcoat it. He simply said, "It's broken, we know, and we're fixing it." This is exactly the type of transparency players have been asking for since Battlefield 5, something the franchise badly needed. Instead of silence, we're getting real confirmation from real developers who aren't afraid to openly address problems. And when you put that alongside the lab's overhaul, the audio rebuild, the networking improvements, and the upcoming combat system reworks, a pattern starts to form. Battlefield 6 isn't just patching things, it's rebuilding itself from the inside out. When you put everything together, the quiet revival of labs, the aggressive new test sessions, the overhaul of audio systems, the rebuild of hit reg, the mysterious key combat system adjustments, and the chosen maps. It becomes clear that Battlefield 6 isn't just getting patched, it's getting rebuilt. The developers aren't just fixing isolated complaints, they're strengthening the foundation of the entire game before they move into the next phase of its lifecycle. And the fact that they are relying on real players to shape these changes means the community is going to have more influence than ever before. The return of labs wasn't just a feature revival, it was the first warning shot that something big is preparing to unfold. And if the December tests go well, the next few months of Battlefield 6 could end up being the most transformative period the game has seen since launch. So, keep an eye on labs, keep an eye on the dev posts, and most importantly, keep an eye on the updates that follow, because they're not just building toward a patch, they're building toward the next evolution of Battlefield.